Hello and welcome. This is your weekly fix. I'm Smitha Nair. This program has, in the past, examined how hate speech leads to economic and social marginalization, to lynchings, how it renders a community less than human and living in constant fear. Now, there are two key speech devices, scholars who study genocide say, that are used to prime a majority group to inflict violence on a minority group. One is dehumanization, using language that likens people to animals, insects, or disease. The other speech device is called accusation in a mirror, constantly telling people that they face a mortal threat from a minority group, which makes violence against them seem acceptable, even necessary in self defense. It's called accusation in a mirror because it claims that violence would come from those who are actually the would be victims of violence. Now, you may recognize this speech device being employed in India by those who claim Hindu khatre mein hai, that Hindus who form the overwhelming majority in India are under threat. Where is the supposed threat coming from? From the minorities, particularly the Muslim community. And cinema today is emerging as one of the most potent vehicles to exercise this speech device. More than half a dozen films propagating right wing conspiracy theories are slated for release in the run up to the 2024 general election. You are no doubt familiar with the one already released, the Kerala story. Now, how effective can films potentially be in shaping public opinion, in generating hate? Will a ban on films that propagate hate be counterproductive, as free speech absolutists claim? These are a few of the questions I'll be asking Ira Bhaskar over the next 30 minutes. Ira Bhaskar was still recently Professor of Cinema Studies at the School of Arts and Aesthetics, Jawaharlal Nehru University. Professor Bhaskar, thanks so much for making the time for speaking to us here at Scroll.
Thank you so much. Pleasure to be
Right.
here.
Right. Ma'am, straight away, has this sort of collaboration between the purveyors of popular culture, in this case, Hindi filmmakers, and the state, been seen before in the history of Indian cinema? If not, why do you think this is happening now?
I mean, okay, two parts to this question. I think the if I were to go back to the pre-independence period and in the immediate post-independence period, Bombay cinema and Indian cinemas, because we have so many of them in so many different languages, were a participant in the anti-colonial agenda. That's absolutely true. And but how much did the state actually collaborate? It's a question for which the answer is no. In fact, Gandhi himself was quite against cinema. He did not believe that cinema has any value. But the filmmakers, for instance, the filmmakers of Prabhat, of Bombay Talkies, all of these studios in the 30s and in the 40s were making films that in different genres would support an anti-colonial agenda, right? So it was not as if the collaboration was a collaboration that worked in terms of funding or in terms of propaganda. However, there was a coming together of the vision of India as a plural multicultural society, which is very important because that is the vision that these films, and I'll give you an example, there are many examples. I'll give you an example of a film from 1941 called Padosi, made by V. Shantaram for Prabhat, which is a film which is based on a Hindu-Muslim friendship, a friendship of two old men. So it deploys the trope of brotherhood, of fraternity, to actually counter external threats to this village, which has been living in harmony. And there is an attack from external. It's a sort of an allegorical film, and it's quite foundational. It was quite foundational in terms of actually generating a kind of approach and ideology for filmmakers of the time who wanted to support the Indian national movement. So that's one. There were other filmmakers and other genres, for instance, the historicals particularly. And I do want to mention this because that's where the huge difference between then and now is. Right through the 1940s and through the 50s and even the 60s, you had several, I mean, we had several historicals, what we call historicals, which are basically films, the genre historicals, which are basically films that draw upon legends, anecdotes about a historical figure that sort of circulated. Now, and these films functioned like the mythologicals in an allegorical manner to raise concerns, and to deploy discourses that were important for India on the brink of independence and right after independence as well. I'll give you an example: Pukar 1939, which is a film about Jahangir, Mughal Azam 1960. So if you look at between Pukar and Mughal Azam, there's Shah Jahan, there are several, there's several films of this kind, and they all deployed a lot of films that were also films on queens and empresses like Noor Jahan and others, Mumtaz Mahal. There are films that actually deployed the Mughals to present an image of India as a nation in which Hindus and Muslims belong together. This is very important. And Pukar actually had an ideological project that was an anti-colonial one, which was to stave off and to fight the perception by the British that India is not fit for self-governance. Hence, a lot of the historicals were using films and were using narratives to demonstrate that India's notions of mercy, justice, governance, law were far were very, very appropriate for self-governance. So this is what was happening then. So,
Right.
I mean, I don't want to see this as a collaboration. These were interventions by artists and filmmakers who wanted to support an anti-colonial agenda and who were very strongly behind an agenda of India as a plural, multicultural polity. The big difference, as is obvious to everyone today, that the historicals are no longer performing this function. In fact, they're doing the opposite. So all the historicals that are being made now demonstrate Muslims as or portray Muslims as evil savages who are totally uncivilized, violent, bent on destroying Indian culture, bent on destroying India, and all the atrocities that Muslim rulers from outside who were seen as invaders have inflicted upon India. And India has been a victim of Muslim invasion. Right, the
Right.
most recent films, if you look at Padmavat, and if you look at Samrat Prithviraj, at the end of Samrat Prithviraj, there is actually a header which says this was the last Hindu emperor of India, and for 775 years, India has suffered oppression by invaders and Muslim invaders. That's the big change today.
Right. Professor Bhaskar, I wonder, let's talk about the impact of these films. I wonder where you stand on the spectrum of responses that we have seen to films such as the Kerala story that I mentioned in my introduction. So, on the one hand, you have those who caution that hate is being mainstreamed through our films, that cinema is potent and it's being weaponized in a scale and manner that we saw only before, perhaps in Nazi Germany, World War II, pre World War II. On the other hand, there are those who dismiss this as an exaggeration. They say you have to rely on what they say is a wisdom of the public at large, that the audience is not lobotomized. And besides this claim that the films are only entertainment, they don't hold the kind of power that's being attributed by some to the medium, and also the claim that at best these films are only preaching to the converted.
I mean, I think this is a difficult question, though, and I absolutely agree that cinema is a mass medium, and it is extremely powerful, particularly at a point like of the contemporary times as today, when it is being weaponized, when cinema is being weaponized by the ruling government in order to create a change in the mindset of the majority population. This is happening. And I mean, I don't have evidence of funding for these films, but the manner in which films are being made, Kashmir Files, Kerala Story, and not only the manner in which they are being made, the manner in which they are being exhibited, with stories of RWAs buying en masse tickets and distributing these tickets to the members of that association, of their own associations, making people go and see these films, therefore pushing up the sales of the tickets, and 200 crores, 300 crores, whatever, to demonstrate that this is valid, and this is perfectly kosher.
Sure.
I've served on the
And being endorsed by the prime minister, like the Kerala story was,
and was
and tax
and
exemptions by state governments done by the
and,
BJP.
and Kashmir Files was also endorsed by the Prime Minister, who exhorted everyone to go and see the Kashmir Files as a true story and so on. Now, I mean, of course, these are difficult issues. I mean, terrorism is a difficult issue. Kashmir is a difficult issue. The Pandit migration or exile is a difficult issue. All these things did happen. The point is, how do we respond to this? I've served on the CBFC. If you ask me, would you support censorship of films? I'd say I don't support it. I think films should not be censored. I think people should be allowed to, make films. At the same time, I I also feel that when this kind of hate speech is being not only mobilized, but is being supported by governments, this is an extremely dangerous tradition, extremely dangerous sign of our times, and especially when the audiences are in a way being subject to a kind of mainstream discourse of hostility, of hatred of the minority community, especially the Muslim. When this discourse of hatred for the Muslims that leads to lynchings, that leads to deaths, that leads to an entire community being vilified, and not just vilified, actually dangerously and violently attacked, then members of the CBFC, for instance, have to be much more responsible. However, we are also facing a situation where these committees are backed by people who would support the ruling party and the government, right? So we have a very difficult situation. I've served on the CBFC, and we were very sensitive to questions of hate speech. I mean, doing things like, gali to a barber, and abuses towards a particular community, the kind of jokes, etc., that films of the past have indulged in, and that was not a problem. But actually attacking a community with a discourse, with a definite purpose of generating hatred against a particular community, that is not all right. That is something that organizations like the CBFC have to be extremely sensitive to. So what should be done? Should films be banned? It's a difficult question, but I would certainly say that certain cuts, films should not be banned. Certain cuts can be initiated, and government should not get into supporting films. Let audiences decide. But we are not in a situation where audiences are deciding on their own. They're being mobilized through different modes and through different I don't want to go so far as to say arms of the state, but audiences are being mobilized by civil society groups, and majoritarian groups to sort of pay obeisance to a discourse of hatred of the minority, of the Muslim, and to unfounded fears of attack by a minority community. I mean, it's an absurd that you've already said that in your introduction. And it's an absurd fear that it's the Muslims who would attack the Hindu population. I mean, there is no basis for this kind of a fear. There is no evidence for this kind of fear. But it is being mobilized because we are living in a society which operates on fear, on generating fear against a minority in order to achieve an agenda of the Hindu Rashtra. That's the reality. So, what would you say um, about a film like RRR, in which Jai Shri Ram is being, Adi Purush has released today. I haven't seen it, but I've seen the trailers, where Jai Shri Ram, the song, there is a song called Jai Shri Ram. Now, if Jai Shri Ram is the phrase with which Muslims are being lynched and are being forced to say Jai Shri Ram and are being killed while they recite Jai Shri Ram, while they're being forced to, then would you not say that using a phrase like that in a very aggressive manner in a mainstream blockbuster film is a problem?
So that's something to think about. Also, the real life consequences of films propagating these conspiracy theories like Love Jihad. We've seen that our viewers, of course, will be familiar with what's happening in Uttarkashi in Uttarakhand currently.
Exactly.
With the bogey of Love Jihad, and no doubt fanned by movies like the Kerala Story are
Yeah.
sort of playing itself out.
Yeah.
You briefly referred to this in your earlier answer, Professor Bhaskar. I want to ask you specifically, how do you deal with this when you're faced with questions as somebody who's seen as an expert in cinema studies? In this entire discourse surrounding the Kashmir films earlier, and particularly the Kerala Story now, there was this assertion that has been repeatedly made that look, Kashmiri Pandits were forcibly evicted from the valley. There was an exodus that did happen. There certainly was a recruitment of certain women in Kerala by the Islamic State that did happen. Therefore, these films can't be branded as propagandist. What they have only done is sort of taken certain cinematic liberties. I'm sure this is an argument, a bad faith, I would say, that has been put forth to you as well by some.
I mean, absolutely. What happened with the Pandits, Kashmiri Pandits in the 90s, in the early 90s, was horrible. And there are several films, a lot of documentaries that have been made on the suffering of the Kashmiri Pandit. That I'm not denying that at all. It is a reality. But what the Kashmir Files does is actually, I mean, I wouldn't even say exaggeration. It is a completely one sided story. Kashmir is a difficult situation, and historically, Kashmiri people, which includes Hindus and Muslims, have been oppressed by the Indian state. I mean, it's true. It's a difficult situation because of historical and political reasons, and also because of cross border terrorism. There's no doubt about that. It's not Kashmir is not a state. It's no longer a state, of course. Kashmir is not an area that is free from the kind of weaponization, mobilization, of arms, ammunitions, violence, and terror, supported by Pakistan, in order for against the Hindu population, but also against the Muslim population. It's not just the Hindus who were, and if we look at the history of Kashmir, Muslims have faced the same kind of, they have not migrated because they are there. They can't migrate. Hindus were exiled and they've had to, and I do not deny their trauma at all. At the same time, what Kashmir Files does is certainly propaganda, because there's not a single image, not a single character in the Kashmir Files that shows Muslims as anything other than terrorists, violence, violent people, savage, and full of hatred against Hindus. I contrast this with a film like Mission Kashmir, which is about terrorism and which is a melodramatic narrative about reconciliation and about Kashmiriyat. Where is Kashmiriyat in the Kashmir Files? It's all hatred and violence that is directed by the Muslims at Hindus. So just as the exile, I would say the exile of Hindus from um, Kashmir that took place, and the violence that was perpetrated against them. Where does a film like Kashmir Files talk about what Kashmir's history has been? Kashmir's history, and I'm talking of a history of 1,000 years, Kashmir's history has been a history of mutual coexistence, of Hindus and Muslims living together as Kashmiris, not as Hindus and Muslims. Where is Kashmiriyat in the film? And is Kashmiriyat not a reality? Was it not a reality? And the point is also that the in a film like Mission Kashmir, and I'm particularly talking about Mission Kashmir because we're talking about Kashmir and Kashmir Files. So contrast the two films, and there are other films also. Um, There's another film made by Vidhu Vinod Chopra on Kashmir that didn't do well because its project, I can't immediately recall the name, because the project was one of reconciliation. It was a love story of a Kashmiri uh, um, Hindu couple who have had to face exile, have had to face dislocation. But the message of the film was people coming together. The message was not about how horrible the Muslims are. So when we look at Mission Kashmir, the project of the film Mission Kashmir, was to demonstrate how terror and violence are put into operation by terrorist organizations to destroy Kashmir as an area to destroy Kashmiri people, both Hindus and Muslims, right? So question of terrorism is not a question that we can actually understand in the context of Kashmir as being directed only against the Hindu population. So it's complex, whereas the Kashmir Files is a black and white narrative that demonstrates how evil the Muslims are and how they have no human feel. They'll kill their own mother, they'll kill their own brother. That's the kind of question that one of the characters is asked, and he says, "Yes, I'd kill my father. I will have no objection to killing my mother or my brother." You know, so
Right.
and Kerala story. I mean, if you come to that, I haven't seen the film, I have to say, but from the trailer, 3,000 such women, or 30, no, sorry, 32,000 women, such women have been recruited for the ISIS, have been kidnapped and married to Muslim men and recruited for the ISIS. The number came down to three when so of course things happen. Of course there's ideological mobilization that's taking place and indoctrination that's taking place. So what should our approach be? Should our approach be that Muslims are horrible, they should all be killed, they should all be thrown out of India? Or should our approach be that these are problems for the Indian state to deal with, and that all our citizens, Hindu, Muslim, Christian, whatever, whoever, whichever religion they belong to, are citizens of India and have to be protected. And that's the prime dharma, if you like, of the Indian state.
Right. Can we, for the moment, Professor Bhaskar, focus on biopics of historical figures? And one particular film, Swatantra Veer Savarkar, made by Randeep Hooda, makes the claim that Savarkar was an inspiration for legendary freedom fighters like Khudiram Bose, Subhash Chandra Bose, and Bhagat Singh. Of course, in the last many days, we have seen the king of Netaji and Khudiram Bose come out and condemn what they call is a complete distortion of facts. My question is surely making claims about actual personalities, historical personalities that are not backed up by historical records, cannot be filed away under cinematic liberty or
No,
free speech.
it cannot be. Not at all. Not absolutely. I mean, Bhagat Singh was a Marxist. Bhagat Singh was believed in justice for everyone. Bhagat Singh was not. He was not a communal figure at all. So I mean, whereas Savarkar was, and or if one reads the records, the life history of Savarkar, I mean, what can one say? I mean, this claim is so absurd. It's actually being made because these figures are, because the filmmakers who are making these films and backed by the powers that be want to appropriate these figures for as their own history. The RSS had no role in the national movement, but the RSS, through these biopics and through these different kinds of genres, are making that claim. For instance, I'll draw your attention to the ending of RRR, which is a Telugu film dubbed in many languages, including Hindi. At the end of RRR, there's this celebratory song, etc. It's a complex film. I'm not saying that it has a one-point agenda, but at the end of RRR, in the last the credit song, um, which is celebrating Indian response to colonial violence, etc., and national leaders are being mobilized. And yes, it's true that a lot of nationalist figures have not had narratives that have addressed their role. Interestingly, while Bhagat Singh is mentioned and his photograph is there, Patel is mentioned, and various other South Indian leaders and Western leaders, Shivaji, etc. Of course, Nehru and Gandhi are not in the in the list of national leaders who have. Patel is, but not Nehru and Gandhi. Now, isn't that very interesting? Okay, so there is a, I mean, it is propaganda, right? To do that, it is an attempt to demonstrate that people like us were part of the national movement when all historical records show that Savarkar was actually a coward. He petitioned the British for mercy several times, not once, and that he had a role. The historical records actually say that he had a role in the assassination of Mahatma Gandhi. I mean, the biographies of not just Gandhi, but books on the assassination of Gandhi that have looked at these records demonstrate that he was, and there is, and Savarkar's presence in court during the trial of Godse. Yeah, all of that go to actually demonstrate the role that he had. And there are films that have been made. Of course, they didn't do well because of you have by which time a majoritarian discourse had already pervaded our body politics. So I think, I mean, there's a member of parliament who says that Godse was a nationalist leader. He's a figure who everyone should worship. And tomorrow we'll have a film. We have a film on Savarkar. Tomorrow we'll have a film on Godse that will claim that he was the greatest nationalist of all because he killed Gandhi. I mean, for God's sake, what are we talking about? And there are members of parliament who are saying that. I mean, Savarkar is already in the parliament. In 2003, Savarkar's portrait was placed in the Central Hall of Parliament opposite that of Gandhi.
Right.
So, you know, I mean, what are these biopics doing? They're all propagandists and they are attempting to claim these particular figures as part of the nationalist history of the country, which clearly they weren't.
Right. So, as these films look to rewrite history in a way, I wonder if you could sort of take a broad view at the Indian film industry. And since we are referring to the Hindi film industry as perhaps being most expansive in India, I want to briefly look at what happened in Hollywood when Donald Trump won the presidential election. Professor Bhaskar, filmmaker Jane Kshoban wrote a piece in the Filmmaker magazine that I had shared with you before this interview, entitled "All Movies Are Political Movies. We Need to Do Better." Please allow me to read a few lines from it.
Sure, sure.
This was an election work won on culture, on unchecked fear and hatred. This was an election won through our screens, through entertainment. This was an election won by angry white men who believe themselves to be at the center of the universe, who thirst for violence, who hunger for a rogue, fascist, white male hero to deliver them magically from all perceived injustices. Where on earth would they get these kind of ideas from? Then, of course, she goes on to talk about how every movie made is a political film. My question, Professor Bhaskar, to you is, in India, where is the counter narrative to these propagandist films? Who's making them? In Hindi cinema in particular, is there no incentive to make films that get you to question the narratives being peddled by the state?
The biggest hit this year has been Pathan. Pathan is a counter narrative to this, and Pathan. And if you look at the ads for Adi Purush, because it's released today, I was just this morning looking at some of the fan responses and the advertisements and the trailer, etc. And a lot of people who are responding are saying this is the opening day um, uh, sale of tickets is going to go beyond that of Pathan. So clearly there is a way in which Pathan is being pitched as a target that Adi Purush and other such films have to beat. Now, Pathan is a mainstream blockbuster film. All of these films that we're talking about are, whether it is RRR, whether it is Adi Purush, whether mythological films, historical films, they're all action oriented, right? Spectacular VFX. Some of them are really bad, but VFX generated spectacle and action. In the mythological films, you'll have Shriram, leaping with his bow and arrow and killing whoever, and so on, and to resounding music and that kind of thing. Pathan is also an action film. It's an action thriller. What is and it is, of course, mobilizing. It's a very nationalist film. It's a very patriotic film because it is responding to the, and I'd like to use the word patriotic because it's a film. While it rides on the stardom of Shah Rukh Khan, it's actually a film about who is the real patriot. Is the patriot the person who fights for the nation, or one who goes against the nation? And what is the nation? Is the nation a majority community, made up of a majority community only? Or Shah Rukh Khan has said in interviews that a true patriot is one who loves the country wholly, not in parts. Okay, I think Pathan is a counter. And when you say it can be counter a film, films like the ones you are mentioning, and I'd add Adi Purush to that list that you talked about. When it's a mainstream blockbuster film that has 500 crores and more being spent on its production, etc., it has to be countered by a film at that scale, at that spectacular scale, both economically as well as cinematically. Pathan has done that. And if you watch Pathan, Pathan is not a film that is narrowly nationalistic. It has both a vision of all human beings belonging to whichever religion are important, are those who, so it has a humanistic ideology. It also does not look at enemies, all Muslim nations, as our enemies. There are very important sequences in Afghanistan, for instance, which is actually about an Afghan village that the main character saves from a terror attack and sees as his family home. I mean, in the sense that the villagers are his own family. So also there is an ISI agent who he works with, who realizes that extremists within the ISI are against humanity as a whole. And so she works with. So what I'm saying is that the notion of the enemy is very kind of calibrated. It's very nuanced, and it's working on a scale which you need to counter these kinds of films that you're talking about. But that's not the only thing. There are other kinds of films. Let me mention Mulk by Anubhav Sinha. Let me mention smaller films like, and filmmakers are making those films. So there's an early film from 2007 called Dharm. Um, I think Bhavna Talwar is the name of the filmmaker. There is of course Mulk. There's Shahid, and there's a beautiful little film called Nakash, which was made in 2019, which actually is about the way in which ordinary and poor Muslim craftsmen are being killed by the cadres of the Hindu right. When, and Nakash is a particular, it's a film I love very much because the Muslim craftsman does Nakashi or sculpture in Hindu temples, and he's killed because of that. But his ancestors have traditionally, for hundreds of years, decorated Hindu temples beautifully, right? And he has deep respect for Hinduism, and it's set in Banaras, and he has deep respect for Banaras and for Hinduism there, and while being a Muslim. So, but it's not enough to have respect. It's not enough because he's a Muslim, he has to be killed. So, what kind of logic? So, there are films both at the, I mean, Pathan is, there aren't other films like Pathan yet, but hopefully there will be. But Pathan is one big blockbuster example of mainstream cinema countering the kind of ideology of the Kashmir Files and other such films, and Adi Purush and whatever else. And I think there are smaller films. There are mid-level. I mean, Anubhav Sinha's Mulk did quite well. It was a small budget film. And then there are other indie films that are actually supporting a vision of India that is not a majoritarian Hindu vision or a Hindu Rashtra, that are made to actually look at India from a constitutional framework, from a constitutional perspective, and to see India as a multicultural, plural nation.
There was a time when we thought that OTTs perhaps will deliver us from this sort of
Yeah.
stifling environment. But that, from what I understand, is also running into some rough weather. The Bakar Banerjee's Netflix production, I'm told, which talks about this, multiple generations of a Muslim family, has not seen release. We've seen what happened with Aparna Purohit from Amazon Prime being dragged to court over Tandav, etc. So that
Yeah.
kind of censorship is also sort of underway and perhaps resulting in self-censorship by filmmakers. I want to close this conversation, Professor Bhaskar, by asking you this question. We've all looked at Bollywood and the Hindi film industry as being this unequivocally secular space. Even if the fare being dished out may largely be escapist, or we have scripts that strain credulity, the industry itself has been seen as a bastion of progressive values and being sort of avowedly secular. My question is just changing.
Of course, it is. There's a split down in the middle, or even sort of much two-thirds of the space being taken over because it's a question of money. It's a question of support. The filmmakers, I mean, it'll take a lot of finances to mount a counter narrative against the because the films that are being made and those who are supporting the government are getting funding not directly but through producers who are putting money in. I mean, Kangana Ranaut apparently, now again, this is allegedly, has been given 100 crores to make a film on Ayodhya. She's acting in and is directing a film on Indira Gandhi. Now, what do you think these films are going to be? So obviously these are, this is not a secular space anymore. I mean, it. I think those film people who are not Hindus and who are Muslims or belong to any other continue to work in the industry but have to perform as per the dictates of the film that often has an ideological project that's totally different from what they believe in, but they have to do it because of so I think there is a split. I think there's still people in the industry who are secular. I think there's still scope for doing work, but of course the weight of money and ideology is on the other side. So people have been mobilized, big filmmakers have been mobilized for this project, and that's the sad reality. Because actually, because Bombay, particularly Bombay, has been, and the Bombay film industry has been a secular space, almost utopian in its project of representing India in its multiplicity, in its plurality. That is the reason why the RSS has its knives out for Bollywood. And either they have to destroy it or they have to co-opt it. And co-option is what is happening. So yes, it is changing quite rapidly. Yes, the agenda is a Hindu Rashtra. And by hook or crook, by ideological indoctrination, by money, by narratives, whatever it takes, this kind of indoctrination project, ideological indoctrination project, that appeals at some sort of subconscious level to the deep sort of pride of Hindus in their culture, civilization, whatever. It appeals to that, and therefore these films are being made, they're being destroyed. One can only hope that others who have a different vision continue somehow to find the money to make the films they believe in. I also want to mention a small film. It's not so small, but and it's a very important film called Afwah, and how social media and
On
rumors
misinformation here.
and misinformation actually can generate, you know, mayhem, violence, death, and this is what these are the means by which politically the state today in power is operating.
Right. On that hopeful note, Professor Ira Bhaskar, I thank you for making the time and for sharing your insights.
Thank you very much. Pleasure being here.